During the 1980s, when Stephen King was at the height of his powers, 2 films were adapted from his stories based on a fear King had had since childhood: killer automobiles. The first, Christine, was a slickly directed and stylish teen horror by John Carpenter, which has grown in reputation over the last 40 years and is now considered one of the great King adaptations of the 80s. The other was Maximum Overdrive, a film King himself directed. It was slated by critics, hated by audiences, and even King himself would go on to describe it as a moron movie. After making Maximum Overdrive, Stephen King never directed again. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of man-made monsters, and we discuss 2 Stephen King adaptations, Christine and Maximum Overdrive. Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike Muncer, and as ever, I am your host. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the history and the evolution of the horror genre, one subgenre at a time. We are currently in the middle of our 11th season exploring the evolution of man-made monsters, and this is part 17. In this week's episode, as that intro suggested, we're going to be looking at 2 very fun Stephen King adaptations from the 80s. We've got Christine from 1983 and Maximum Overdrive from 1986. Both of these discussions will be spoilerific. I mean, definitely check out Christine. I'll leave it up to you as to whether or not you want to check out Maximum Overdrive before listening to our discussion. Joining me to discuss these films, well, a longtime friend of the pod. He was here last series discussing Wake in Fright with me, and he's back. A big welcome to Jamie Graham. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Mike. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you?
I'm very well, apart from I've broken my ankle, but we won't go into that. We won't bore your.
I was just hearing the story before we started recording. A classic Jamie Graham incident occurred, right?
Only I could trip up 10 metres from my house on the morning of going to the Lake District for a walking holiday and break my ankle, so that was fun.
Unbelievable. Well, Jamie, thank you for being back again on the main podcast. Last year we were discussing obviously sort of the dangers of nature and we were talking about animal attack movies and all of that kind of thing. This year we're sort of doing the flip side to that, so we're looking at the dangers of science and technology in horror, and I guess that kind of sci-fi horror kind of mashup as well generally. But what are your thoughts generally on this area of the genre, Jamie? Are you a fan of these sorts of movies, these kind of mad science movies, I suppose?
I am massively, especially when you stop to think about it, because if you immediately say to me mad science movies, I think, yeah, I like them, but they're not like one of my favourites. And then you actually start to go through the list, like all the films you're covering, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
On this season, and you begin to realise, like, when you start to throw in stuff like 2001 and Blade Runner and Terminator and stuff like that as well, which I often think of more science fiction than horror, a lot of those, but obviously there's a foot in the horror genre. But yeah, then I begin to realise, actually, this may be one of my favourite genres. There's so many absolute belters in there.
Yeah.
You know, so love it.
I agree. Are you, I think I know the answer to this question because I know you, Jamie, but I was going to ask you, how are you with technology? And
Mike is asking this question just after he's asked me to do this podcast with headphones in, and I couldn't make them work, put them into the laptop. They wouldn't work. I hate technology, Mike. I really wish I could turn the clock back in a way to when I was growing up as a kid in the 1980s and before everything happened, or I could just about work a Walkman when I was a teenager. That was like the limits. And since then, everything that's happened with the internet and with apps and, all the sort of daily shit we have in our life now, which is meant to make life easier and seems to make life easier for most people, I just find it a constant fucking nightmare, an absolute headache. I'm sent links to review films and I'm usually trying to work out the password and the authentication factor. And You know, it takes me an hour to get into the bloody film, and then it's pausing every 10 minutes. I really hate it. I hate it.
Absolutely. What about AI? How do you feel about AI and this kind of, this impending AI takeover?
I am absolutely convinced that it's going to kill us all.
Oh my God.
I really am. I'm full Skynet on this. I really do believe that, I obviously don't know a lot about it. I haven't got that kind of brain, and people will tell you otherwise. But I fully believe that the machines will take over, that we would do something where we can't control it. It would become sentient. It would sort of elevate itself way beyond what we're capable of and decide that we're just the menace and get rid of us all and send the nukes. I really think I'd be surprised if we're here in 10 years' time. I really would.
On that cheery note, do you think that's why it's been such an enduringly popular subgenre? I mean, going all the way back to Frankenstein, all the way through to the, we're getting so many movies these days, Companion and Megan, movies about AI.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been one of those very consistently popular subgenres, hasn't it? Always.
I think the reason is just because technology is always evolving. So it's always in our consciousness. It always feels dangerous, a threat to us, as well as being helpful. You go back to the 40s, 50s, especially all the kind of nuclear movies, nuclear disaster, atomic threat, be it Godzilla, them, whatever it is, so many of them. And then you go through and you have all cloning and stuff like that. And now obviously it's AI, that films have been dealing with AI a long time, like 2001, Terminator, stuff like that. But like you said, Mike, you sort of alluded to it just now, the last 2 or 3 years, it seems every other movie is concerned with AI at the moment, not just in the horror genre, everywhere. And I think there's always the next thing and there's always the fear. So hence, it would never leave us. It will always be in our movies.
Completely. Well, we've got, I think, a really fun double bill to discuss this week.
Yes.
Car horror, truck horror, right? Automobile horror, which I'm really excited about. Both of these, I guess the connective tissue between the two of them is Stephen King. So I want to ask you a little bit about Stephen King. Now, we've talked about him quite a lot together, especially on Patreon, Jamie. But
we have.
Just remind people who haven't heard you discuss that. You're a lifelong kind of super fan of Stephen King's work, right?
Yeah, Stephen King is my absolute sweet spot. I've said this to you before, Mike, but I watch all movies, all eras, all genres. I'm just an absolute film freak who's a completist and just hoovers down movies. But if you narrow that down, if I had to name a favourite genre, it's definitely horror genre. And then you sort of narrow it down to what's your favourite kind of horror movies, or what's your particular sweet spot, your area of expertise. And I'd go all the way down to Stephen King, really. I first got into King when I was about 13, 14, reading his books. Firestarter was the first one I'd read that had just come out after the film with the Drew Barrymore cover. It kind of grabbed me in a rack outside a newsstand. Just like I thought, what's that? Got to read that. It was such a great cover. And then I just read them all back to back, all those early works, Cujo, Dead Zone, Shining, Carrie, name them all. I just did them one after the other and became completely obsessed by them and started reading loads of books about King, analysing his work. I did my dissertation at university on Stephen King. And I've just sort of always followed his career, both movies and books. Yeah, absolutely adore him.
Yeah, me too. And again, I feel like we're going to talk about two movies here from the 1980s, 1983 and 1987 or 1986, I believe, right? So I guess this was very much kind of peak Stephen King time, wasn't it? This was when he was kind of, one of the biggest names in the world, essentially. In horror,
definitely. Right? I mean, 1986 was a year that It came out, which to me almost felt like the summation of all of his work up to that point. And it's amazing that, it had only been 12 years since Carrie, but it felt like King had been around a lifetime, that he was so huge. By this point, he was completely a household name. He was a best-selling author right from the start with Carrie, Salem's Lot. The Shining was his first hardback bestseller. Became a completely household name, sort of doing something new in horror in a way that all of his kind of ideas and themes were maybe secondhand. There's only so much you can do, but he really poured new wine into old bottles by setting it in such a recognisable America with kind of working class characters who talk like you hear on the street, and just sort of brand names and McDonald's, etc., etc., etc. And he really took horror to the masses. And by this point, you know, by the time Christine came out in 1983, you're talking, I mean, Richard Kobritz, the producer of Christine, had been sent the galleys of Cujo and Christine in advance before they were even published. And he chose Christine, and Christine was in production as a movie before the book even came out. You know,
wow,
that's how big King was by this point. All the great horror directors, apart from maybe Wes Craven, had got involved. De Palma, Cronenberg, Hooper, obviously Kubrick had done The Shining. You know, even people who had no interest in horror whatsoever, if you went up to someone on the street in the mid-80s and said Stephen King, they'd know exactly what you're on about. You know, it's kind of like Michael Jackson or Madonna or something. It's just Stephen King, Michael Jordan.
It's incredible, isn't it? And like you say, he's the master of that kind of small Americana, working class town, everyday, regular characters, friendships, and bullies and rivals, but also monsters and addiction and you know, all of that kind of thing. But also, he does seem to have this kind of obsession, right, or fear or phobia of machines, of cars, of automobiles. Like, where does that come from?
Well, apparently it goes back to his childhood that, you know, I think he was quite a scared kid anyway, and probably scared of most things, but he said that he just had a fear of automobiles in terms of trucks and cars. Just as a little kid, he found them really big and really scary, like, oh, what would happen if, you know, that came at me, which proved quite prescient, of course, because he had his famous car accident where he was kind of knocked over and almost died, and his body was shattered, you know, much later on in his life. But yeah, he said, like, machines frighten me. And I think it's not just cars and trucks. I think it's everything. Like, you go through his work, there's chattering teeth, there's the monkey, there's the sort of ironing machine, the Mangler in his short story, The Mangler, which Toby Hooper made. You know, there's so many inanimate objects come to life in his work. So I just think it's one of probably his many fears, something that his mind just recoils from. And
it's really interesting, isn't it? And we'll talk about this a bit more as we go through these two films, Jamie. But do you think that cars and machines, can you make them scary? Can you make them monsters in the way that, for example, Pennywise and Jack Torrance are such kind of brilliant, scary monsters?
I'm not sure you can, Mike. To be honest, I mean, as we go through this podcast, you'll see what a fan of Christine I am, that I'm absolutely obsessed with this film. But I don't think it's a scary film. You know, not particularly scary. It's a little bit unnerving. But if you're someone who thinks a horror movie, the main job of a horror movie is to terrify you. You know, if you go to a cinema on a Friday night with friends to see a horror movie because you want a real scare and you want to be clutching each other and all of that, I don't think Christine does that. Truck certainly doesn't do it. I think, you know, there's only so much you can do with it. Spielberg and Jewel maybe did it a bit more successfully. But I don't think you can, like you said, Pennywise or the Jack Torrance or something like that. I think there's only so far you can take it. I mean, what do you feel? I know John Carpenter, you know, he's quite down on Christine a bit. He's come around to it a bit with the passing years, but at first he was very down on it. And he's always said, like, you know, it's a bit of a joke. You can't make a car scary. You know, the moment he got the script, he was just like, well, what can I do with this? You know? It's just not a scary concept.
I completely agree. I mean, I actually, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but I came to Christine relatively late because I remember being a kid and seeing like Christine in my local video store and thinking, that looks naff. That does not look scary. Like, what is going to be scary about a killer car? You know, like, I just thought, even as a kid, that sounded pretty lame to me. And I didn't know, obviously, at the time that it was also, you know, John Carpenter, and it was going to have all of this brilliant kind of other sort of horror and drama around kind of coming of age and, you know, all of the great stuff that we'll talk about. But just that concept of a killer car to me never sounded that scary or appealing. I think, you know, a few filmmakers have done it well. I think you're right. I think Jewel is the best example, isn't it? Stephen King managed to make
the scariness.
It's really scary. Like Stephen Spielberg managed to make like a truck, somehow kind of anthropomorphized it. You know, he did turn it into this kind of looming monster in a way, but it's really hard to find many examples of, you know, successful examples of that, I think, isn't it?
I think with Christine, a lot of people can't get or couldn't get past that fact that we'll probably talk about this later, Mike, but when it came out, it got pretty mediocre reviews at best.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, it was just simply that they just found the concept of a killer car a bit silly and they couldn't get on board with it.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know, it's definitely got that aspect. For me, the way Carpenter does it and the other factors in the film, which we talk about and you just mentioned, you know, there's so much more to it, means I'm fully on board with it. Like you would not believe. I absolutely adore it. But yeah. Completely. And it's funny, isn't it? Because I would say probably statistically, they're probably the machines that kill more people every day than anything else, right? I mean, it's funny. We have so many of us might be scared of flying or various other things and not actually be that scared of being in a car from day to day. And yet statistically, you're more likely to be in a car accident than anything else, right? They are death machines in a way, right? But we sort of take that for granted almost, you know? They really are. I think it's because they're part and parcel of everyday life that you kind of have to have a car to get around. That maybe people don't want to face that thing. You don't, every time you go to work in the morning, want to think this could be it. You know,
right. Yeah.
Could be dead in the next 10 minutes. But I do have a couple of friends who really have issues that they're not good passengers.
Yes.
No, but if they want to go somewhere by car, they have to drive. And if someone else is driving, they're literally sort of clutching that handle above the door of the passenger door. You know, they're really white knuckled about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably sensible, you know, so there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. Well, let's talk about, so we'll start by talking about Christine from 1983. Oh, I'm excited to get into this, Jamie. Tell us a little bit, first of all, set the plot up for us. What's Christine all about?
So it's set in high school and it's about a teenager called Arnie, played by Keith Gordon, and his best friend Dennis, played by John Stockwell. And Arnie is like the school nerd, you know, he's never been laid. He thinks of himself as very ugly. He's a bit geeky. His best friend Dennis is really quite cool, that he's like a football hero and a bit of a jock, but a sensitive jock. And they've obviously been mates for years, but Dennis hasn't done that thing that a lot of friendships do, that when you become cool and your mate doesn't, you sort of go off and find your own group. He's sort of still best friends with Arnie. But Arnie is sort of going through life. He's a bit, you know, he does everything his parents want. He's in the chess club, all the stuff like that. He's kind of a good boy. And then one day driving back from school, they see this hunk of junk, basically, Christine, which is a 1958 Plymouth Fury. And it's really just a shell of a car. And Arnie is immediately, just something grabs him. He falls in love with it. He insists Dennis stops. He buys the car and he dedicates his life to making it up. That, he wants to kind of, do it up to make it spanking new. And it quickly becomes clear that something is a bit weird about this car. There's maybe more to it than just a car, but it's a bit sort of sentient, and it's only plays 50. It came off the production line in 1957, and it only plays 50 songs on its radio. And sometimes it won't get start when Arnie gets in it, feels a bit jealous because he's had his girlfriend in the car and stuff like that. And then Arnie has to croon to it and say, "Come on, Christine, come on." And then like you turn the key and it will start. And then what begins to happen is Arnie starts to become quite cool in his own way. That he starts to dress like a 50s greaser from the era of Christine obviously came off a production line. He loses his glasses, of course. He starts to dress quite cool. He has a James Dean red jacket from A Rebel Without a Cause. And all of his enemies in school, because he's really bullied by this group of horrible, typical Stephen King bullies, that they're nasty bastards. They begin to die mysteriously one by one. And there's kind of reports of people seeing Christine out at night, sort of on the highways. And is she doing it herself? Is Arnie behind the wheel and mowing them down? You know, so that is the plot.
It's so good. I mean, let me start off by asking you, Jamie, you're a big fan of this movie, right? What's your kind of history with it?
So I was about 14 and it was on TV late one night, and I think I was just getting into Stephen King. It was early in my King love. I hadn't read the book at the time. I'd read a few King books, but not yet Christine. And I taped it off TV, and the next evening after school, I put it on and I literally watched it 4 times back to back.
Wow.
It just finished and I could not fucking believe it. I was just in love, like Arnie with Christine. I had that.
Right.
That level.
Well, a 14-year-old boy, that's the perfect age for this movie, I think.
Oh, it is. I was infatuated, and I just rewound that tape and watched it again, rewound it, watched it again. I watched it 4 times that night. And many, many, many times more on that tape. And it was on, I think it may have been ITV or something, because it had adverts. And to this day, Mike, I haven't counted, but I reckon I've seen Christine about 70 times in my life.
Wow.
And to this day, every time I watch it on my Blu-ray, I expect the ads to come in. The points in the film where on my original tape it had ad breaks. I know exactly where they are. I can even remember the ads in the ad breaks, some of them. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those films I know sort of every line, pretty much every line of dialogue of, and stuff like that. So I was completely obsessed by it. And the funny thing is, I didn't realise the TV version I watched was heavily edited, that they'd taken out all the swearing. And Christine is a very, very sweary film. Like when they finished it, they wanted an R rating because they thought that would be better for audiences, get people in. And it's not very violent, so they couldn't get an R rating. So basically, when they finished the script, so Bill Phillips, who wrote the script, he went back and kind of put in loads and loads of F-bombs and a couple of C-bombs just to get the rating up to R. So it wasn't for a few years later until I bought it on finished video. It came out on VHS. I bought it for about £30, which is how much videos cost in those days. I played it. I couldn't believe it. This film I knew inside out suddenly had lines like, "If it's yours, why doesn't it have your name on it? Arnie Cunningham."
Right.
I was like, what? I was like, what? And of course, this made me fall in love with it even more. It was like F-bombs everywhere. It was fucking awesome.
I love that. I mean, like I say, perfect. I think as a teenage boy, this is the ideal kind of demographic for this movie, right? In a way. But I, like I said, I came to it later. I think I was in my 20s by the time I finally gave this film a chance, because I think I was unnecessarily sniffy about the idea of it until I was really kind of became a horror, completionist, and I was like, well, I can't not see this kind of Stephen King, John Carpenter movie, right?
Yeah, of course.
Finally sat down to watch it, and I thought, God, what have I been doing my whole life avoiding this movie? Like, it is beautifully well made, this film. In fact, every time I've probably now watched it about 6 or 7 times in total. Actually, we screened it together, Jamie, didn't we, at Halloween this year in Oxford, which was brilliant, seeing it on the big screen, because it is gorgeous to look at. The soundtrack's incredible. The performances are great. I think there's loads going on. Yeah. The car is just a tiny part of it, actually, isn't it? Really it is about this it's this coming of age story about this nerd turning into this kind of slightly toxic bully almost, right? And I love it. I think it is an absolute, I don't even know if we'd call it underrated anymore, because I feel like its reputation has grown over the years, hasn't it? I think.
Definitely. Yeah, when it came out, I saw it in 86 and was immediately banging on about it to everyone. Yeah. And when I first became a film journalist in 96, I was banging on about it to everyone. And even then, people were really incredulous, because when it came out, it got really sort of lukewarm reviews. Stephen King hated it. We all know about his hatred for The Shining, but he at times grouped those two films together, and he talked about them together, and he said, The Shining and Christine should be great movies because Kubrick and Carpenter, blah, 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 but they're both not. And he actually thought Christine was really boring, the film. And over the years, it became a sort of bit of a cult classic. Then it became a classic. And then it became, a lot of people, I think, now rate it almost as like a genre masterpiece, and it's on Criterion Channel. It's really built up a reputation, and few things have given me more pleasure in this industry over the last 30 years and seeing people come round to this film, which honestly I've been banging on about since day one. I think it's amazing.
I love it. You were ahead of the curve, Jamie. I love it. Well, we've talked a bit about Stephen King and kind of where he was at this point in time. Let's talk about John Carpenter then as well. I mean, like, again, this feels like the absolute peak of John Carpenter, doesn't it? In the middle of that incredible run, it feels like he was really, I mean, especially I suppose within genre, he was really top of the game, wasn't he?
Yeah, it was sensational from the sort of mid-70s through to the late 80s. Just incredible. And what's interesting with Carpenter in this is that The Thing was his first big budget studio movie, and it came out in 82 and completely flopped. And got really bad reviews as well, which seems incredible now, but it just didn't chime at the time where America was at that time. And Carpenter was therefore fired off his next movie. He was working on Firestarter, the King book. And to this day, he says it was a great script and would have been a great movie. And he's still really bitter about being fired. So he kind of came to Christine as a director for hire, that he needed a gig, and therefore he didn't have quite the same sort of personal, input in terms of personal love to all his early movies that he developed himself and had his fingerprints all over them. So I think he was a little bit sniffy about it. But what he did do, he tried to sort of connect with it in the ways he could and pour himself into it in the ways he could. So he very much saw himself in Arnie Cunningham, because he grew up, John Carpenter, as a sort of lonely kid in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and he was a bit of an outsider. So he really connected with the loneliness of it. John Carpenter actually lost his virginity at a drive-in, which he told me a couple of years ago when I interviewed him about Christine. Actually, he said that he lost his virginity at a drive-in, and John Carpenter, like Stephen King, is a very unpretentious, no bullshit man. So I think he really connects with it then, and he's the same age that they grew up in 50s America when Eisenhower was sort of putting in all the highway system and cars came to symbolize the American dream and like youthful freedom and all of that. So I think he really connected it on those ways. But like you sort of mentioned earlier, Mike, I think technically, in terms of the direction, in terms of the camera movement, the score, the set pieces, everything like that, I think it's Carpenter's masterpiece.
Wow. Yeah.
I really do think that obviously The Thing and Halloween are more important films, and, they're the ones that always appear in the great horror list, and so they should. They resonate more in a way, and they set trends more and more trend setting. But in terms of, I would love to do a screening of Christine like Roger Ebert used to do with Citizen Kane, where you literally talk it through it frame by frame, scene by scene, because I think just the direction, the way he moves that camera, everything is just him, Carpenter, at the absolute peak of his game.
I mean, it is. I think it's probably the most gorgeous, one of the most gorgeous looking Carpenter films. Actually, I was actually kind of surprised to see that it wasn't Dean Cundey. This movie,
it's amazing, isn't it?
I really assumed it was Dean Cundey, but it's Donald M. Morgan, right, cinematographer. And but my God, like especially watching it on the big screen. Every time I watch it, I'm like, God, it's just absolutely gorgeous. The lighting, like the way that the car is shot and lit, those beautiful scenes of driving at night, the scenes of Arnie behind the wheel with the kind of green and red lighting on it.
Yes.
I think it is like, I would say you're right. I think, obviously The Thing and Halloween are kind of the biggies and the horror masterpieces. But I would say maybe technically this is one of his most gorgeous films to look at. Without
a doubt. He shot Donald M. Morgan shot quite a lot of it on Panaglide. And, you can sort of say, well, it's a film about a car, about mobility. So it makes sense that the camera's always moving in this film. It's sort of elegant the way it's shot, but it's always sort of quite sinuous takes. You can get all pretentious about it, saying, well, that fits a movie about a car. But John Carpenter, like I said, he's absolute no bullshit, and he's so modest, and he won't take anything like that. And when I interviewed him for a Christine piece a couple of years ago, I said that to him, and he laughed me out of town. And he just said, I used a Panaglide because I just wanted to keep this piece of shit moving. literally how he put it. Yeah, he doesn't take any prisoners.
Oh, he's such an old grump, isn't he? But yeah, God bless him. And what about the way this film sounds as well? So you've got the gorgeous classic kind of John Carpenter, Alan Howarth score, but then also you've got this brilliant sort of pop soundtrack, right? The songs in this movie are really important too, right? To the plot and the character of Christine. I think that's genius as well, the way that Carpenter handles music and the soundtrack in this.
Yeah, the fact that the car rolled off the line in 57 and only plays 50 songs, so you got a bit of Buddy Holly in there, a bit of Little Richard, keep a knocking, all that stuff. And there's loads of sort of croony love ballads as well, but it's a really touching, in a way, I mean, it's obviously toxic and fucked up and they kill loads of people, but it's a really touching romance as well, love affair between Arnie and Christine. It's first love when it's just all consuming, you know.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Arnie totally forgets about his best friend Dennis and doesn't turn up for plans they've made and stuff. All he cares about is Christine, and a lot of love language comes through that radio, through those croony tracks, when he's just sitting there with his head on the dashboard and he's sort of stroking the steering wheel, and you got a lovely 50s ballad crooning out. And Keith Gordon very much played it that the car was a woman, because obviously you got the 1958 Plymouth Fury, which is all sort of voluptuous curves.
Yeah.
If you watch the movie, as so many times in the film, he's just stroking it. You know, be it the interior or exterior, he's always stroking Christine and sort of muttering to her and whispering sweet nothings. It's really lovely.
There's a beautiful moment when he's just like staring at the car in a warehouse and it's kind of regenerating itself or whatever, right? And it almost feels like you're watching some sort of sex scene between them or something, you know?
Yeah, it's got really sort of seductive jazz.
Yeah, that's it.
Soundtrack on that moment. And again, I mean, you talk about Carpenter's control and his technical brilliance. That scene, just the way Arnie walks away from the car, which has been absolutely destroyed by the bullies. It's just a mangled mess. And he walks away and the camera sort of follows him and he turns around and the camera pushes in on Arnie's face, just as he says, "Show me." And at that moment, the headlights blare and they use sort of landing lights from airfields to make them that bright. They sort of blare, and then Christine slowly comes back to life. She regenerates, which was amazing special effects for the time, that they sort of had an empty car with hydraulics and cables and they pulled it all in on itself and then played the film in reverse, so it looked like it was sort of all, you know, regenerating, and you got this seductive jazz going. Yeah. And it is a love scene. You know, it's basically, up until that moment, we're not sure if there is something supernatural there or if just Arnie's going around killing people or whatever. But that is a moment where Christine shows Arnie and Carpenter shows us, you know, everything. It's a moment of revelation. It's like being in bed at night with your girlfriend the first time you sort of stay up all night and bare your soul, you know, and it's one of those moments, isn't it?
So the movie begins obviously with it on the production line, and we're listening to Bad to the Bone and everything, and we get those first shots of Christine. How do you find it? I mean, you've just kind of mentioned this a little bit, but the way in which Carpenter frames and presents Christine sort of as a character, right? And we talked about how difficult it is to make a car scary as a horror movie monster. But how do you find it, the portrayal of Christine herself, I suppose?
I think she's great because she's just got so much personality, you know, done through the ways we've talked about with the music and not starting and all of that, being quite moody, and then coming through for Arnie, you know, when he really needs her and all of that. And it does start. The interesting thing is, in the book, you've got the character of Roland LeBay, who used to own Christine. He is in the book as this sort of demonic, mangled ghost in the passenger seat who rides shotgun whenever Arnie's out driving Christine. And it's this ghost who sort of talks to him and almost possesses Arnie. And Carpenter, they got rid of that because partly he wanted to streamline the book because it's a big doorstep novel. And partly because American Werewolf in London had come out a couple of years before, and it was very similar to what we have there, with a sort of, you know, mangled ghost talking to the protagonist. So they got rid of that. And they made it all about Christine, that right from the start, you've got that scene set in Detroit in 1957 and the song playing is Bad to the Bone. And Christine kills someone who gets in her passenger seat as she's on the production line and taps ash from his cigar onto the passenger seat. And, So she kills him, and right from the start that no, this is an evil car. I think Carpenter does a really good job with it, as good as you could do, really.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. It's done as well as it could possibly be done, I think, in terms of giving an inanimate object a personality, and what Carpenter does with it is incredible. And then, of course, let's talk a little bit about this character of Arnie then. So we're introduced to Arnie. He is, as you say, he is the classic nerd, right? He's kind of broken glasses, and he's awkward and gangly, and played so brilliantly, right, by Keith Gordon. What do you think of this character in this performance?
I love him. I mean, he's kind of the Carrie White, the male version of Carrie White, in a way, a school nerd who, not very good looking in a conventional sense, who gets bullied horribly. And it's interesting that Keith Gordon got the part because the studio wanted Scott Baio, and John Cusack actually auditioned for the role, and then Carpenter was going to give the role to Kevin Bacon, and then Bacon chose Footloose over Christine. So wow. Keith Gordon came in, and he's not someone we really knew. That he'd been in Jaws 2, he'd been in a couple of De Palma films, he'd been in all that jazz, but quite small roles. And he came in, and he's just brilliant. What I love about him is he plays it with enough sincerity and heart and pain that you really feel Arnie's ordeal, his loneliness. But at the same time, he has just enough fun with it that he embraces, it is a slightly silly concept, and I'm going to do it just a little bit tongue-in-cheek and a little bit over the top and a little bit theatrical. So as he becomes like a 50s greaser and this sort of cool kid, just some of his mannerisms and gestures and the way he talks and the way he lolls his tongue in his cheek and stuff is just ever so slightly over the top. He gets the balance just right. And again, I think the reason Gordon is so good is because he connected with it. Because he himself, he got a scholarship to a college, and he went there, and all the other kids were really rich and he wasn't. So he felt apart from it. All the other kids were cool and he wasn't, but he wasn't quite nerdy enough to fit in with the nerds. And he said he was basically very, very lonely through his school and college years. And then when he was 16, he fell in love with this girl and was absolutely head over heels first love. And then her parents found out about it and split them up and sent the girl to boarding school. And it really cut him deeply, and he's pining for her. So basically, he took all of that and he poured it into this character.
Yeah. I think it's a brilliant performance as well. And I think what's really interesting as well, I think it's sort of aged really well in a really interesting way. When we screened it on Halloween, I was talking to somebody afterwards, a woman who had watched it. Yeah. And she said what she found really interesting about the character is that she was like, to me, he was a bit of a dick from the very beginning. He showed signs of being a bit entitled, almost a bit misogynistic from the very beginning, even when he's the sort of quote unquote nice boy, right? He sort of feels like he deserves a girlfriend, getting laid, and it is that classic kind of teen boy story of like, I want to get laid for the first time as well. But I think it's really interesting that when he makes that transition into the kind of toxic greaser bully, there is seeds of that possibly from the very beginning, right? And it is a classic, really interesting story of like, often that can happen, right? The loner, the bullied kid can become the bully. And I think Stephen King has done that really well, actually.
That's really interesting, Mike, because like I said, I've seen this movie probably 70 odd times. I've never considered it from that angle, but I think you and that woman at the Oxford screening was spot on in a way. Just thinking off the top of my head, I think you got the early scene in the car right at the start of the film when Dennis is saying, we got to get you laid this year, Arnie. And it suggests a couple of girls that like, maybe you she could be the one. And Arnie just poo-poos it. He's like, there's no way, I'm sleeping with her.
Right.
And Dennis says, why not? And he says, she's got a mustache. And he says, why the fuck do you care if you get a little bit of hair in your mouth? Something like that. Yeah. It's very much dialogue of its time. The world's moved on a bit since then. But he's definitely got that sense of entitlement. Now that you say it, and you could look at it like Jack Torrance in the book, more so the book than the film, of The Shining, that he goes into that hotel and the hotel plays on his floors. That he's an alcoholic who's abused his family before, and the hotel sort of gets into that chink in his armour and exploits it and turns him into this monster. There's definitely an element of that, I think, Christine and Arnie.
I agree. And then actually what's really interesting is you've got Dennis, who is the jock, the good-looking one, the popular one. He actually, I think, probably is the nicer character of the two of them.
He's lovely.
Isn't he? You know, and actually, it almost feels like just as much a sort of love story, a platonic love story between these two more than anything else as well, isn't it?
I find their friendship really moving. Like, it's years since I read the book. I was a teenager, so I can't remember if it goes into it more deeply. But I imagine they've been friends since they were very young kids. And like I said, I think Dennis, rather than leave Arnie behind, is still very close to him. And that's what you've got through this whole film, that Arnie becomes more and more of a dick.
Yeah.
You know, like Dennis turns up for prearranged plans and Arnie's forgotten all about them. When Dennis is in hospital with, you know, injury that almost paralysed him, Arnie hardly turns up at all. You know, he visits him a couple of times. There's like days between visits. He only spends a couple of minutes when he's there, and then he's too busy. He's got to go off and run errands with Christine. You know, he's a real dick, but Dennis never quits in his love for Arnie. He's always there. He's always his best friend. He really, really wants to save him. He sees what's going on with Christine, and he basically puts his life on the line for Arnie, that he goes up against Christine because he wants to sort of retrieve his best buddy, save his soul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's kind of beautiful. And I mean, Dennis's story is very sad in this movie, actually, isn't it? That he's like, almost, like you say, almost paralyzed to the point where he's never going to play football again. And, you know, he kind of loses everything in this movie, his best friend and his life. And it's just as much Dennis's story, I think, in a way, as it is Arnie's.
There's Dennis as well. I mean, let's not forget that when Lee turns up at school, she's a new girl in school and she's the most attractive girl in school and she's really intelligent and, you know, great. Everyone wants to get with Lee. And Dennis makes a play for her and asks her out. And obviously, you know, he's a school jock and he's such a good looking lad that he normally, you know, lands the ladies, you could say. And she turns him down. And then she turns up at the football game that he's playing in with Arnie, like in Christine, and Arnie starts dating her. So he loses that as well. And even that, you know, he doesn't hold that against Arnie at all. He's sort of pleased for him. But he's got with Lee and he sort of admires him. And again, just as a little side thing here, Mike, talking about John Carpenter's genius technical direction, there's so many amazing set pieces in this film. But that, if you look at that football scene where Dennis gets injured, if you ever want to see how to craft a scene of tension and suspense, it is masterful. The way Carpenter cuts, the way the camera sort of dollies, the way the music comes in. It is just like, it's about a 30-second, minute-long masterclass.
I agree with you. I can picture it right now in my head, that moment. And it's such a beautiful example as well of the kind of melodrama of teen life, right? How everything in the world of a teenager is life or death, right? And everything huge. Comes together perfectly. That moment when Dennis is playing football, he's keeping a lookout for the girl that he's got a crush on, and then there is that realization, there she is kissing Arnie, right? And it's as he's running, the camera sweeps towards them in this moment of drama and tension, and then bam, he gets hit, right, and tumbles upside down and is injured, and it's a perfect kind of horrific accentuation of that kind of teen drama, isn't it?
He's running for that long pass and everything slows down and the camera's moving with him, and he's looking at Arnie and Lee get out of Christine and start kissing, and the music, and then like you said, it sort of slows and slows and slows, and then boom, the tackle comes in because he's not watching, which like almost paralyzes him. And Buddy Repperton, the bully, and his crew are sort of in the stands cheering that they've gone down. You know, they're also sort of cutting them into the action. It's just the most beautiful. I'm going to go madly over the top now, but it's the most beautiful sort of 30 minute of film you ever see. It's just a masterclass.
I agree. It is beautiful. And again, you know, Stephen King, the master at making high school look like the most horrific place imaginable, right? I mean, like, from the beginning, the bullies in this film, that moment in the kind of workshop where he gets, you know, attacked by the bullies. And by the way, it makes me laugh that one of those bullies looks about 45.
It's amazing. The amazing thing with this, Mike, the actor playing Buddy Repperton, when we screened it in Oxford, like when he first appeared on screen, everyone laughed, didn't they?
Yeah.
In the audience? Because, like you said, you think the teenagers in Greece look old. You know, that's when Hollywood always cast teenagers who are about 30. He does look about 40. But the amazing thing is, if you look it up, he was only like 22 when he shot that.
He was just an older looking actor, wasn't he?
So you can almost understand, like, he's obviously a bully and he's in the shop courses and he's obviously been held back a couple of years for, like, not giving a shit and bad behaviour. So he's almost like, it's not mad that he's still there at 22. You know, it's maybe stretching it a bit, but that actor, William Ostrander, I think that's how I'm not sure if that's how it's pronounced, but he's like, he looks sort of 35, 40, partly because of his facial hair and like his big hair, but he's also just built, isn't he? He's stumped.
He's massive.
Looks like he's been in a gym for 20 years. It's like...
Exactly. It's so good. But again, those scenes are done perfectly. We've seen it before, you know, Stand By Me, you know, these brilliant portrayals of the kind of really scary, dangerous bullies.
I mean, this is proper bullies. This is what bullying was. I don't know much about schools now. I haven't got children, but this in my day in the 80s is what bullying could be like. Yeah. You know, it wasn't just a bit of sort of pushing around or a bit of name calling. You know, Buddy Repperton has him held hostage, like in the basement with a fucking flick knife, you know, and you really think, is he going to stab him? And it's just, you know, it's really, really nasty. The school I went to, you know, every year there were incidents of kids, like stuff you wouldn't believe.
Yeah.
It's just like really, and King understood that, just how nasty bullies were, you know, but they should be in prison, basically, as vicious.
Yeah, absolutely. And so often that's where the real horror lies in a lot of King's horror stories, I think, right? But what about the scenes of genuine horror that we get in this, you know, with the car kind of attacking and killing victims and that kind of thing? Again, I think Carpenter does a pretty masterful job, right, of the kind of chase sequences and the scenes of horror that we get here.
Yeah, but the thing is, he or the screenwriter, Bill Pullman, have changed the book inside out, not just with getting rid of Roland LeBay, the ghost in the passenger seat, but pretty much every death in the film is completely different to the book. You know, they rewrote it. And the reason being that Carpenter really wanted to make everything cinematic as possible. So you got deaths like obviously Buddy Repperton when the car mows him down. He's sort of running down the highway at night in a pitch blackness, and you've got Christine on fire. You know, completely. So good. She's been caught in the gas station fire, so she's blazing as she sort of follows him down the highway with the Carpenter score going. You know, you've got Moochie, another bully who he's running around, again, nighttime streets, and Christine sort of chasing him. And they're just amazing set pieces. They're done with such craft.
They are.
Like, absolute beauty.
They really are. Like, God, again, like that scene of the car on fire, stalking its victim down that road is unbelievable. I mean, it is like, again, considering this is in some ways quite hard cinematic material to work with, Carpenter just did what a phenomenal job. You know?
Yeah, I love the scene with Moochie where he's walking around at night on these streets, and we should say as well that some of Christine was set in the same sort of suburbs as Halloween was set in Pasadena. It was shot there. So he's walking around streets at night, and then he sort of sees this car in the distance and it's sort of ticking over, and he's like, you know, is that Christine? Is that Arnie? You know, because they've trashed the car, so it shouldn't be out on the road. You know, how could it be? And then you've got that wonderful moment when Moochie goes, he goes like, is that you, Cunningham? And at that moment, the lights go boom again. Yeah. Those 12-volt batteries, the lights just go, and then the score starts and off it goes. Christine revs up and just chases him down. It's just sensational.
It's the way when the lights come on and the score goes bing. like, it's just so good, isn't it?
It's so
it's
great.
Amazing. And yeah, it's nasty. Like the moment when he gets like crushed, you know, in the little sort of galleyway there. I mean, it's brilliant.
Yeah, again, there's hardly any blood in this film, which again is why they had to put in all the swearing for the R rating, but there is nastiness. Like that, the way it gradually squeezes into that gap where Moochie's hiding and then just crushes him.
Well, let's talk about some of those effects and how because, God, we see this car get destroyed and crumpled a lot and set on fire and all sorts, right? And this was quite a rare car, right, that they were using for the film. And they had to use, am I right in saying about 17 different versions of Christine when making
it? Depends where you read it, Mike. The numbers vary from 17 to 28.
Okay.
Depending where you read. 24 is a number that seems to come up a lot. But the point is, there's a lot of them considering they were rare.
Yeah.
That, you know, only 5,303 models were made at a time, and they were all in sandstone white. There wasn't any sort of fire engine red ones like Christine. They were all sandstone white. And for this production, they found 28 of them. 15% of the budget went on the cars. And, you know, they were in various states. Some of them were just show models. So, you know, after the car has been trashed, you then get a gleaming new one. Maybe it couldn't even drive down to the end of the street. It was just there. You know, then they had other ones which were like hero cars where it could do all the stunts and stuff. But yeah, it's fantastic. And the reason King chose that car, the 1958 Plymouth Fury, is he felt it was a forgotten car.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, he didn't want a really classic like a Thunderbird or something. He wanted a forgotten car, and he took it. And his first car as well was a Plymouth. It was a 1956 Plymouth. That's what he rode around college back in the day. So there's a bit of nostalgia there. And this film obviously is drenched in nostalgia and wistfulness and all of that.
Yeah, it's so cool. And again, I was talking to somebody after our Oxford screening where they said, God, how did he even pull off that regeneration scene? Because again, you can see that the footage is played backwards and that what they probably did was crumple it and play it in reverse. But even how they managed to crumple it is actually amazing, isn't it? And you mentioned, Jamie, it's like hydraulics, right? And that
They essentially had a sort of empty car, and inside they had hydraulics done by the guy, Roy Arbogast, who worked on The Thing with the mechanical effects in The Thing. There was hydraulics inside and cables, and they sort of pulled it all in on itself.
Wow.
And then they reversed the footage. And the only time you can tell the footage is reversed is when you have like the wing mirror.
Yeah.
You know, the glass in that, which has shattered, sort of jumps back into place. And then you can sort of see in that fraction of a second that, you know, there's some funny business going on. But otherwise, it's all done so sort of elegantly and sleekly. The car just gradually sort of reforming itself.
Yeah.
It's just a thing of beauty.
It is. And it's actually such a sad moment when the bullies trash the car, isn't it? There's something about it, obviously knowing Arnie's connection to it, but also just watching something that beautiful get trashed on camera like that is really, I find it quite hard to watch, that sequence.
But the thing is as well that Arnie's put so much time into it.
Yeah.
He drives home this husk of a car that is sort of puttering and farting as it goes along. You know, it's a really ugly hunk of junk. And then his parents won't let him keep it in the driveway, so he has to put it in a garage, Will Darnell's garage. And we see him, you know, he's just sort of rummaging around in the pile of spare parts and trash outside the garage, and he's finding little bits, and he's slowly restoring this car in a really sort of haphazard way that he put brand new windscreen wipers on a busted windscreen, you know, whatever bits he can find, he does.
Yeah.
And then slowly over the course of this movie, he gets it to a point where it is a thing of beauty.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not into car. I'm not that sort of bloke who likes cars and DIY. I can't change a plug. I can't do anything. I've got no interest in it at all. But I look at Christine and it's just so sleek and beautiful. You know, you can see why Arnie falls in love with her. And there she is, gleaming, you know, spit polished. And then in come these bullies with their sledgehammers and knives, and they just trash it.
Oh.
You know, interiors ripping up the leather. It's just, it's horrible.
It's horrible.
It makes me wince every time I watch it.
And what do you think of? So we've got the character of George LeBay, right, who is the old man that sells Christine, and he sort of knows, right? He's our kind of almost like harbinger type character, right? He looks a bit like a sort of old redneck, and he sort of knows that Christine is evil, and. we find out a little bit about the backstory, right, of his brother, who was the original owner and everything. And how do you interpret, I suppose, Christine's origin? Like, is this just a machine that was just born evil? Is that essentially its kind of origin?
I think it is. I think, the moment it was put together on that production line, there was something sentient in it, and it was evil.
Yeah.
It kills that guy immediately. It traps another guy's hand in its bonnet when he's trying to sort of do things on the production line. It's just a vicious bitch, basically.
Yeah.
And then it goes from there. And then Roland the Bay, we find out he owned it and again was completely consumed by it. Like both his wife and his 5-year-old daughter died in the car, sort of choked to death on fumes, ran from the tailpipe. Still wouldn't get rid of it. He cared more about Christine and his family. And Arnie's exactly the same. He's meant to be in love with Lee, the most beautiful girl in class. And he's a terrible boyfriend to her, terrible friend to Dennis, like we've said. All he cares about is Christine. She needs and demands that level of love.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm really glad that you don't really get to know much more than that. You don't need a reason. Like, it's not aliens. It's not that the car is possessed by a dead serial killer. There's nothing like that. It's just like, no, this is just a car that was made and has been evil since it was made on that production line.
Yeah,
basically.
no idea why.
Yeah, it's great. And you got some fun kind of supporting actors and characters in this. Robert Prosky as Will Darnell makes me laugh when he's always kind of chewing tobacco and that kind of stuff. And of course, you've got the great Harry Dean Stanton as well, who I always sort of forget is in this as the detective too.
Yeah, he's not in it that much. He's Rudolph Junkins. He's a detective who, obviously when people start dying, he comes sniffing around and he suspects Arnie. And he's just fantastic, like he always is. I mean, what an actor. He's just fantastic in it. And then you've got Robert Splossom, who plays George LeBate, the man who sells him the car that you just talked about, who's in a back brace and has his grizzled beer and, putting these funny expressions, and he's a bit of an arsehole. And I think that's, again, one of the reasons the film is so great is that Carpenter threw everything at it he could to try and make it as good as it could be from a premise he didn't particularly like. And one of the things he threw at it was just fantastic character actors. Yeah. With just their faces, you could train a camera on those faces and watch them all day long.
Absolutely. You're so right about that. Just brilliant faces all round. They've
lived lives, Mike, haven't they?
They've lived lives, exactly.
Like you and I, mate. Like
that's right. It's all over our faces, absolutely.
It is. But more so than when we started 5-10 years ago, I'll tell you.
Exactly that. But you're so right. And again, it captures that Stephen King small town, right? Yeah. I mean, there is. In a way, I'm a bit sad that Carpenter and King never worked together again, because of all the directors that have adapted King's work, and we talk together about some of the best ones. We all talk about Frank Darabont. We might talk about Mike Flanagan. These days, Rob Reiner. Yeah, but. I think John Carpenter really, there's something about Carpenter's style and King's stories that this feels like a marriage made in heaven, doesn't it?
They seem so close, like they should be the best of friends.
Yeah.
It's like I said, they're similar age. If you read anything on them when they're talking about their formative years growing up and what they were into exactly the same movies, all the sort of B movies of the 50s, sort of monster movies, all of that. They've got the same musical references, growing up with, and they're both such similar characters that you see King interviewed, and he's so just no bullshit. Yeah. He famously referred to himself as the literary equivalent of a Big Mac and fries. He really puts himself down, and he hasn't got a pretentious bone in his body. And John Carpenter is exactly the same. Yeah. And you can just imagine those two guys. I mean, obviously time's moved on. I don't think King smokes anymore or does anything anymore, but you can imagine them just spending the evening sucking six packs, smoking fags, and just putting the world to rights,
moaning about the industry and the world.
Moan.
Absolutely. It's perfect, isn't it? And how do you find the sort of, finally then, how do you find the way that this story concludes? That big kind of climactic sequence with the bulldozer versus the car and everything. How do you find that sequence?
I think it does the job. I don't think it's the strongest part of the film. You know, if I'm going to be objective, I think the fact that it's set in Will Darnell's huge cavernous sort of warehouse garage, and they get there late at night and they are going to try and take out Christine, lure her in and take her out with a bulldozer. And just because of that idea of it, that it's Dennis driving a bulldozer with his gammy leg and he can't sort of work the clutch, it naturally is a bit stop-start. A bulldozer is a very slow machine, so it sort of trundles along, and they're trying to get momentum in it from Christine herself racing around the garage and stuff like that. And then eventually the bulldozer kind of gets hold of Christine, and as John Carpenter puts it, kind of fucks her to death, basically. But it just sort of mounts her from behind and just sort of crushes her. You know, I don't think it's amazing. I think it does the job. I think the rest of the film is maybe better. But the bit with Arnie, how Arnie dies, that the car crashes and he goes flying through the windscreen and he's lying there in her sort of headlamps and the last life is going out of his body.
Yeah.
And you've just got that lovely, lovely, wistful sort of plaintive music. The score, I adore the score in this film. And you've got that playing, and Arnie sort of just reaches up, and even in that moment of death, all he cares about is Christine, and he sort of strokes her grill, you know, sort of saying goodbye to her, and then his last breath passes. And Keith Gordon has said that, you know, he's stroking the V on the grill because essentially that represents a vagina, you know. It's not subtle.
No.
You know, it's a very, very, like First Love is, it's a very carnal thing.
Yeah.
You know, but as well as being carnal, it is just so beautiful. There's something beautiful about that film. And despite everything they've done to everyone around, you know, when Arnie dies, that moment between him and Christine, I find really moving. Love it.
Me too. It's so interesting. And again, like even the idea, I mean, it always happens, right? Men with cars, boats, whatever it might be, they will always name them women's names.
Women,
as well,
don't they?
Right?
Yeah.
There is always this odd, interesting thing
Really
between
odd.
like men particularly and their toys, men and their machines, right? It's so interesting. And that kind of love affair, I suppose, it is like writ large in this movie, which is so interesting.
I've never understood it. My stepfather used to own a boat. Like, that sounds like We're Super Rich. It's not at all. It was like this run down sort of basic bathtub of a boat. But he just spent his entire... I've known him for 40 years, and all he does is tinker on the boat.
Yeah.
Every day he goes down to the seafront and he just finds something to tinker at on the boat and comes home a happy man. It's just like...
It's amazing, isn't it?
I don't get it, but a lot of men seem to be like that.
That's very cool. And again, just to shout out one more time Keith Gordon, because like there is so much he's doing in that performance, and those moments when he turns bad, like that scene again when he's driving Dennis at night and they're drinking. And the way he's lit, he almost looks like a ghoul or something, right? Like they've made him really pale and he looks possessed, doesn't he? You know, it's such a good performance.
Yeah, he's driving along the highway at night and he takes Christine in the wrong direction. So he's driving at like 100 miles an hour down the highway, wrong direction. He's sort of sucking on beers as he does it. And he's telling Dennis is sort of saying, what is it about Christine? And he's sort of saying to Dennis, you know, it's the first time in my life I've ever found something that's uglier than me.
Yeah.
You know, it's really, really tender, despite the fact that he looks like a ghoul and it's horrible. And you've got John Carpenter's just got this really gentle music underneath. And this is what I find amazing about Carpenter. I asked him about the music in that scene because I love it. And he said that basically he'd finished the film and he's playing it and that scene didn't have any music in it. And he just felt, it just needs something. It just needs a little bit something underlying the scene. And he went off to his keyboard and he composed that little bit of music in 2 minutes, he said.
Yeah.
He just basically pushed a few keys and thought that would do.
Oh, God, it's so good.
It's just fucking beautiful.
So
and
good.
and Dennis, Arnie takes his hands off the wheel, doesn't he, as they're steaming along at 100 miles an hour, and he's talking about love having a voracious appetite, but if you feed it right, it can be a beautiful thing. And that's what we have, you know. It's just great.
Phenomenal stuff. And just before we wrap up, just mention that ending as well, because I really love the very, very, very end, right? Where Christine's been crushed, but then is she still alive at the very end there. It's so good, isn't it?
Yeah, you've got the little Sting moment where the sort of guys come along and you hear 50s music playing. You think, oh my God, the radio's still in this like square of mangled metal. It's like somehow she's still alive. But it's just the guys who walk into frame with their kind of radio on their shoulder and you think, oh, okay. Yeah. But then they walk out of frame and the camera pushes in on that lump of metal and then just one bit of iron starts to sort of jiggle slightly. So and then the music comes in for the end credits and it's just that thing like, yeah, is she still alive? Can you kill Christine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Which again, it's just a lovely tongue-in-cheek moment. Like I keep saying, I love this movie because it does have that humour.
It does.
And it doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time, it manages to be completely sincere and completely moving as well and all these things. You know, there's so many moods that somehow, you know, congeal, coalesce. It's amazing.
It is. Well, there you go. Well, just remind us again, Jamie, the reaction to this critically and commercially was pretty lukewarm, right, at the time? Yeah,
when it came out, it didn't get terrible reviews. It certainly didn't get good reviews, but it was kind of rated as mid-range Carpenter at best, mid-range King at best. And this was at a time when a lot of Stephen King films weren't rated, you know. You've got to remember stuff like Cujo, which people like now, and stuff like The Shining, which people adore now, you know, got pretty bad reviews. But it was considered sort of not a very good Stephen King adaptation. Like I said, when I used to go on about it, people thought I was mad. Like other film critics, they were all like, "What?" You know, it wouldn't. They just didn't get it at all. But and then gradually over the years, it's the most pleasing thing. But it became, first of all, like all these films do. You know, this even happens with genuinely bad films. They always develop a certain following, and they have like a cult following. You know, and that happened on VHS. But then that cult following sort of blossomed out and it started to be regarded as a bit of a classic. And now, like I said, you know, I think a lot of the people, or some people even border on using the M word for it, masterpiece. And it's certainly gone up to be, I think, rated as, you know, a stronger work in Carpenter's career now. People will still say The Thing and Halloween and stuff like that, but Christine sort of gets mentioned in those drafts sort of just below.
Absolutely. So, I think for me it would be probably my number 3 behind The Thing and Halloween, I think. But I mean, again, like that incredible run, right? I mean, God, you just glancing at his filmography where he goes from Assault on Precinct 13 to Halloween to The Fog to Escape from New York to The Thing to Christine to Starman to Big Trouble in Little China to Prince of Darkness. I mean, that is unbelievable.
Yeah, they live.
Yeah, they live, exactly.
It's fucking astonishing.
Yeah.
It's just mad. It's one of the greatest runs in cinema history. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, it is.
That's not
Christine is literally bang in the middle of that, isn't it? So
it's amazing. But I agree with you, Mike. I think being totally objective and looking at it with my film critic hat on and the sort of history of cinema, for me, it's his number 3 behind the big 2. But with my heart and my personal taste and what it means to me, it's my favourite.
Yeah, I love that. And that's the same goes for just King adaptations, right? It's in your heart, your number 1, right?
My number 2, Mike.
Oh, it's number 2. Is it behind The Shining? Is that right?
Stand By Me, mate.
Oh, of course. Oh my God. Which is your favourite movie of all time, right?
It is my favourite movie of all time. I've seen Christine 70 odd times. I don't know if it's that number, but I know for a fact, because I've counted from the first time I watched it, for reasons I won't go into, they're very boring, but I've seen Stand By Me 119 times.
Oh my God.
And it is my favourite movie.
Well, they're actually quite interesting companion movies, right? Both movies very much about kind of young male friendship, you know, and they have that kind of slight 50s nostalgia to them as well, right?
50s tunes,
It's almost like Stand By Me is like the sort of younger age version of Christine, isn't it, in a way? You know?
Both coming of age, friendships being torn asunder. Yeah, there's a lot of connective tissue. I think they say a lot about me.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very much, I mean, without getting too personal, but I grew up a child of divorce. I felt a very sort of lost, lonely kid who, my friends were everything to me as teenagers. They were my whole world. And yeah, there's definitely deep connection going on there.
I love that. Yeah, friends and movies, right? I imagine also your whole one.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah,
there you
movies,
go.
yeah, my friends, yeah.
I love that. There you go. Well, incredible. What a masterpiece. We're going to move on to another masterpiece. Jamie?
Disaster piece.
So, Maximum Overdrive from 1986. Oh my God. Jamie, set the scene for us. Tell us what this movie is all about.
So essentially a comet passes by Earth for 8 days and it makes all the machines go crazy. That's really it.
Yeah.
So we start off, we see various things like pinball machines, vending machines, carving knives all go a bit mad and sort of become self-controlling. And then the movie zeroes in on a group of ragtag survivors who are holed up in a truck stop, the Dixie Boy truck stop, led by the short order cook, who's a parolee called Bill, played by Emilio Estevez. And they're trapped inside this truck stop while loads of big 18-wheeler trucks are kind of circling outside, and it's essentially a siege movie. Yeah. It's like The Mist, but set in a truck stop instead of a grocery store, and with trucks instead of Lovecraftian beasties.
That's right. That is right. Exactly that. Is it as good as The Mist, Jamie, as far as
it's not.
siege horror movies go? What do you think of it?
It's no Night of the Living Dead. It's no Assault on Precinct 13. It's no The Mist. No, it's quite a bad film, really. Being objective, it's quite a bad film, but it's fun.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how you feel, Mike. When it came out, it got absolutely slated, like far more than Christine did. It was rated like the worst King adaptation. Stephen King himself, who directed it, which we'll come to, said it was the worst ever adaptation of my work. It got really, really slated. But I think, you know, it's got a certain vitality to it. Mm-hmm. It's got kind of some splattery deaths. It's got loads of practical stunts. It's a soundtrack by AC/DC.
Yeah.
Stephen King called it a moron movie, by which he said, you know, you go along to the multiplex, check your brain in at the door, go in for 90 minutes, pick your brain up on the way back. And it is. I mean, it's a moron movie. It's a sort of drive-in movie. It's just... Yeah. Take it for what it is. It's passable and it's quite fun. I have quite a good time with it, you know, these days.
Same. I think it's absolutely perfectly watchable, this movie. And you're right, Jamie. I think, you know, sitting there with a critical head on, it's not brilliant, and I think the writing is pretty bad. It's like awful. The dialogue,
it's awful.
It's the characters and the dialogue that really lets it down, actually. Because I think generally the vibe of it is quite fun. I think the set pieces we'll talk about with some of the machines and the stunts are actually all right. I think they're quite fun and they're entertaining. It's when we're just spending time with those characters under siege that I start to slightly switch off and my brain checks out, you know.
I 100% agree with all of that, Mike, and it's so weird because when you think of Stephen King and what makes Stephen King, it's the characters. That is first and foremost. It's the colourful characters, the detail of the characters, and King wrote the screenplay, he wrote the short story, he directed the film, and the thing that it is absolutely awful at is characters. Those moments, there's lots of moments where, you know, things have come to a standstill outside and the characters are just waiting out time and they're in the truck stop and they're just sort of talking to each other and there's various dynamics going on and, you know, arguments and, you know, splitting, you know, between who's on what side and all of that. And it should all be fascinating and interesting and we should fall in love with the characters and care for the characters, and we don't at all. They're just shit.
No, it's so interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about King at this point in time. And we mentioned about how he was one of the biggest names in the world at this point. Yeah. But he was also really suffering with a lot of addictions, wasn't he? You know, famously, and he's talked about it so much, you know, his alcoholism and his cocaine addiction at this time was really, I would say, really coming through, I think, in some of his work. He talked famously about how he doesn't even remember writing Cujo, right? You know, that movie,
he doesn't at all.
He was off his head. And I think that's the case with this movie, right? That he was coked up to his eyeballs whilst making this.
He was coked up to his eyeballs. He says he can barely remember it. And, but also, the alcohol, like there's reports from other people working on the set that King would turn up at sort of 7, 8 a.m. for the start of a day shooting, and he was sort of drinking a beer, and by 10 a.m. he was on like his 10th beer.
Wow.
He was just full on, big time drinking Coke, all over the place. Before the movie started, he had loads of, for every single scene of the movie, he had file cards where he'd planned out everything so that he was ready to do it. And he kind of just after a couple of weeks got rid of those because it was just not working and it was a disaster. I think he just kind of lost all control of it, really. And
yeah,
I think a lot of it is probably to do with those addictions. Yeah,
I think so. And it feels, I don't know, it's hard to describe what I mean by this, but it feels like a movie made on cocaine, doesn't it? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like just the tone, it's manic. There's a mania to this movie.
There is a mania to it. And yeah, which makes it quite, I talked of the vitality and the fun, and I think that sort of makes it that way in a way. That what I like about this movie is that sort of madness and incoherence, and the fact there's no internal logic to this film. No whatsoever. Like, there's one bit, it's almost like all the machines, because it's not just the trucks, it's like all machines are now sentient. There's one bit where they can clearly hear the characters because the power's gone out and everything's darkness, and one of the characters say, yeah, but how can we refuel the trucks or whatever, there's no power, there's no lights, and then all the lights come on and the trucks stop. The machines are listening, they go, oh, okay, you need lights, here you go, here's the lights. But there's loads of other times in the film when they're planning against the trucks and how they're going to destroy them, where clearly the machines haven't heard them at all. There's just no logic to it.
Absolutely none. I wonder what, and obviously this is, I believe King never directed again after this, right?
No.
This was it. This was his, so clearly, like, for him, this wasn't what he enjoyed. He didn't have a good experience with it. It's interesting, though, isn't it? I mean, like, because we said, visually and it's not terrible. There is some fun, stunty stuff going on here, but maybe it was that juggling of everything, of like telling a coherent story, of writing characters, of directing actors, and directing all of the stunts that King just couldn't cope with.
Yeah, I think he was obviously, since he was a child, he's been a writer, which is a very lonely profession. You're at your desk tapping away. And he'd never worked with actors, and just that sort of group dynamic, that a film is such a communal job, getting it done.
Yeah.
I'm not sure he was suited to that. Apparently, as well as the addictions, there was talk about, before he was going on set in the morning, he was always up early writing his next novel, his next short story. He didn't sort of put those day jobs to one side because they're all consuming. It's what drives him. He's a storyteller and he's written so much during his lifetime. Mm-hmm. So he still had to do that. So it's like he wasn't fully focused on it. There's talks that he disengaged from it after he wanted, as a lead role, the short order cook, I think it's Bill, he wanted a young Bruce Springsteen in the role, and then the producer Dino De Laurentiis insisted on Emilio Estevez, and apparently at that point he sort of disengaged a bit from the project and didn't want to do it as much. So there's all this stuff going into it, It's hard to tell.
It is. He makes a little cameo at the very beginning, King, doesn't he, with his going up against the mouthy ATM.
My favourite part of the movie is the start.
Completely agree. Before they get to that kind of gas station and then we're stuck there for the rest of the film, one of my favourite set pieces is the soda machine.
Oh, it's brilliant.
So good.
Yeah, when we start, it's just you get little signs that something isn't right and the machines are turning, and you've got King goes to the ATM machine to take money out and it calls him an arsehole, like the writing on the screen sort of says arsehole.
Yeah.
You've got the sort of the electronic billboard thing above the bank and it's spelling out, fuck you, arsehole, to like everyone walking by. And then you got this child's baseball game, and when it finishes, they go to get sodas after, and the vending machine just starts spitting out cans of soda, like mowing down all these kids, and heals the coach, and then a steamroller kind of rolls across the lawn and squishes a kid, and the carving knife goes mad and cuts a woman's arm, and all that side of a movie, which is only like the first 10 minutes, is really fun.
Really fun. It's actually like, do you know what it reminded me a bit of? It feels a bit pre-Final Destination, that stuff,
It really
the bridge collapse scene and the machines kind of lawnmowers running over people and that kind of thing. It feels very Final Destination, doesn't it?
It really does. And I wish there was more of it. I feel the pacing in this movie is totally off. That you almost want to build up more and then get to that truck stop sort of a third or halfway into the movie.
Yeah.
And then play out as a siege movie. But, you know, I haven't done the timings, but it feels like we're in that truck stop after about 15, 20 minutes, and then we're there for a long time.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, exactly. And I think, and again, this is where I was a little bit disappointed that the trucks don't actually get to do that many fun things. Like there's I think you picture a film that is going to be about killer trucks, and you imagine it's going to be a lot of kind of highway, kind of fast moving, like Duel or like some of the sequences in Christine where we're sort of driving at night and chasing. It's just a lot of trucks circling around in one location very slowly, isn't it?
Yeah, they just circle, and there's occasionally an attack, like they bring in a bulldozer and it sort of, rams into the truck stop.
Yeah.
Some of my favourite scenes in the movie is this kind of trailer comes in, which has just got one of those standing machine guns on it, and then the machine gun starts mowing people down. Yeah. It's just whenever anyone sort of pops their head above the parapet, it's like takes them out, squibs going. And again, it's one of the things I like about this film is because of the time it was shot in the 80s, it's obviously all practical.
Yeah.
But, it's real explosions, it's real trucks crashing into things when they do. It's squibs rather than CGI blood, which is a pet hate of mine. So it's got all of that fun side to it. But like you say, the trucks, you could do so much more with it. And they're not scary. But a lot of it, you just get trucks in kind of long shot.
Yeah.
Going around.
Yeah.
So it doesn't even feel like they're sort of autonomous.
No.
Because it could just be people driving the trucks, because you're too far away to see it. So you don't get that sense like you do in Duel, whether there is a man or there isn't a man there. You really get a sense of that machine being malevolent and scary and driving itself. And you get it in Christine to a certain extent. You don't get it in trucks at all. There's no sense of imperilment.
No, it's true. Even the iconic Green Goblin truck, right? The one with the green face on the front of it that you kind of think is going to be our sort of main baddie. Doesn't really get to do anything fun, right? I wanted to see that Green Goblin truck like chasing people and chasing cars and that kind of stuff.
There's none of those Christine moments like we talked about when Buddy is sort of mowed down on the highway at night with Christine sort of racing after him. And Moochie, there's so much chance for those moments, aren't there, where characters could have to go out with truck stop and get somewhere to retrieve something, and it just doesn't have those moments.
No, exactly. It's a bit of a shame that is where it feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity, because there is some quite gnarly gore. Like you say, you've got a lot of blood in this. Again, the moment when the guy gets this soda can to the head, and he's got that kind of circular wound in his head, it's pretty nasty, isn't it?
It's great as well, because it's sort of young school kids, they're all about 9-10 years old, and they've just finished their sort of Saturday baseball game, and then their beloved coach is dead on the lawn with a big circular imprint in his head.
Again, it's a bit like the monkey. This year's The Monkey, isn't it? There's a similar kind of vibe to that, I think.
It is. Like you said, that Final Destination thing. It's like, one thing leads to another, and the machines sort of having their own life.
What about the cast then? I mean, I don't know how much there is to say about Emilio Estevez, Jamie. I didn't think he was very good in this, sadly. What did you think?
I think he's okay, Mike. I think he's probably the best of a bad bunch in a way. Yeah. Which is partly because there's no characterization there. You've got various people turn up, as a honeymooning couple, they turn up. You got the sort of boss. Emilio Estevez's boss is a real sort of shitbag, isn't he? That he's trying to take advantage of the fact that Emilio's on parole and make him work more hours and not sign in and all that, or he'll report him. So you got things like that which you could have fun with, but none of them are particularly likable. You don't take to them, you don't care for them. I think Estevez does okay. I mean, he was cast, he'd obviously done Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire the year before, so he was right on the upswing of his career.
Absolutely.
As one of a brat pack. And it was Dino De Laurentiis who wanted him for the name and the box office. De Laurentiis had done Cat's Eye, he'd done Firestarter, he'd done Dead Zone, so he sort of had a history with Stephen King. And he insisted on Estevez, and at least it gives some fun behind the scenes stories because they had Estevez. Apparently Tom Cruise used to visit the set.
Wow.
Because part of a Brat Pack, so he dropped by a couple of times to hang out, and Estevez was dating Demi Moore at the time. So apparently every weekend Demi Moore flew in and was on set. So you had things like that, but yeah. But I don't know. Would King's option of a young Springsteen have been better? Yeah. I don't know. Or is that just his love of rock and roll? Yeah. That's why we've got the AC/DC soundtrack, which is another fun thing about this movie that I really enjoy.
Yeah, how do you find the AC/DC soundtrack?
I actually really love it because King talking about it being a moron movie. He was friends with AC/DC and obviously worshipped their music. He's a big rock fan, King. So he personally flew in and sort of asked them if they'd do a soundtrack, and they said yes, and they wrote the song Who Made Who for it, and then obviously you got Hell's Bells and Those About to Rock. No, sorry, You Shook Me All Night Long is on there. And every single time an AC/DC track sort of cranks up, I just really enjoy it in a sort of fun way. And it always makes me think that, King, he lived in the town of Bangor, Maine, and he always described Bangor, Maine as a working class sort of hard drinking men's town where everyone was in boots and jeans, and I just feel it's a movie sort of made for that, really. It's those kind of characters. It's got a weird humour to it as well. It's quite scatological in places, that you not only got the thing of having to escape the truck stop that they crawl through a sewer, but you got that really weird scene where Estevez is having a conversation with someone while they're in the toilet.
Right, and you can hear them shitting, right?
Yeah. Estevez, I think, is having a piss, and the guy next to him that he's talking to is in the cubicle just having a really noisy dump. And it's
that is you're right. Weird choices. Like what is he going for tonally with this film, right? He's not setting out to make a scary horror movie. He's not setting out to make The Shining here, is he?
I think the weird thing is, when King was younger, he certainly said once that if I ever direct a movie, it's going to be the scariest movie ever made. which I think was just him probably playing into the Stephen King of Horror thing.
Yeah.
But when it actually got down to it and he's on a film set trying to create something, I think probably he realised very early on that he couldn't do that, but it's beyond his sort of talents as a filmmaker. I mean, he didn't really know what he was doing.
No.
Said he was learning on the job, that the crew were using, terms he had no idea what they meant. They were saying, "Oh, we'll do pickups later," and he was like, "What the fuck's a pickup?" I don't, he just didn't know. He could barely sort of point the camera in the right direction. I think, that was it. So yeah, it's a strange one, but
yeah. I know. Well, this is it, and it's interesting, isn't it? That made me think of another movie we've discussed together, Jamie, which is Clive Barker's Hellraiser too. Because again, like, Clive Barker talked a lot about how he didn't really know what he was doing making that movie, and he had a lot of help, right, from the people in the crew, because that was his directorial kind of effort. And oh God, what a better job he did in a way than King did 1 year earlier. It's so interesting, but I find it always fascinating to see when writers transition to being directors, and just how different, like you say, those two disciplines are. Really,
the weird thing with King though is that his writing, when you read his books, they're very sort of filmic, and King himself has said this, that when he writes a scene, he sees a scene almost like it's in a movie. And if you read Dance Macabre, his book on sort of the horror genre, both in literature and film, you realise just how deeply steeped in cinema he is.
Yeah, and how much he understands horror filmmaking,
He's seen it all. He grew up sort of just ravenously devouring horror films. He really understands it, has a deep knowledge about the mechanics of it and everything, but that is obviously very different to then actually turning up on a set with a big crew and a cast of actors and knowing what you're doing. And I think, even if you took away the coke and the alcohol, I think he was maybe a little bit lost.
That's it. I mean, it's such a different discipline. I mean, me and you, I'm not comparing us to Stephen King, Jamie, but we understand horror movies, but that doesn't necessarily mean we could step onto a set and direct one, right?
That's a weird thing, Mike. Earlier in this podcast, I talked about that scene in Christine, the football game, and how it's a masterclass of kind of creating suspense. Yeah. I can see it, and I know exactly I can break down how it works and why it's so great. But if I had to do it myself, if you suddenly said, Jamie, like, go and make a short movie tomorrow, it would be the biggest piece of shit you've ever seen, mate. It would be absolutely awful. And I wouldn't have a clue how to make a suspenseful sequence. It would just be awful.
And totally. There's so much that you have to juggle. I would find it very intimidating having, 50 odd people on a set, from like grips to sparks to cameramen to sound men to all to the actors all looking at me as to what to do within this like very tight amount of time and a very big budget. I would find it absolutely terrifying. I would never do it.
And they all know their jobs inside out.
Yeah.
You've got all the crew in their khaki shorts, all the sort of sparkies or whatever they're called, and they know their profession. And I don't, like I said, I can't change a plug. I can't do anything. So someone would be coming up to me and saying, "Oh, what do you think about this? Shall we use this lens or shall we do?" I'd just be like, I don't know. And
some people just have that skill, don't they? It's one of the things that I find so impressive about the Philippou brothers, the directors have talked to me, who were so young, and I asked them about that. I was like, what was that? You grew up just making YouTube videos together. What was that like, suddenly being on a set of 100 people and controlling it all? Yeah. And they said, it was fucking terrifying, but they threw themselves into it, and clearly they just are naturals at it. Whereas some people just aren't naturals at that kind of thing, Yeah.
I think, you've got to have amazing bandwidth and be incredible at multitasking.
Yeah.
Be able to field 200 questions a day.
Yeah.
And all that, personally, I really struggle with multitasking. I like to focus on one job and do it to the best of my ability and move on to the next job.
Yeah.
So if I was sort of trying to concentrate on something and suddenly someone said, "Oh, what I got you, can I just ask you quickly?" I'd just be like, can't do it,
Exactly. Also, how do you find the kind of alien comet kind of backstory to this as well? Because again, I kind of feel a bit like that was unnecessary in this.
Yeah, I think maybe it's just King doing a little nod to his childhood, that he loved all those 50s space movies.
Absolutely. And I suppose that's what this is, isn't it? This is like The Blob. This is like it came from outer space. It's those sorts of things.
It's just a B movie with a sort of bit of nonsense. Yeah, it's definitely. It's interesting though that you've got that sort of green sky, those terrible effects when you see the sky and the sort of cosmic dust, most of which went straight up Stephen King's nose. I think that you've got that sort of cosmic dust, and it has a green tinge to it. And it's interesting that you've got certain scenes in Christine that have a similar green tinge, which I don't know if that is just pure coincidence.
Yeah.
Sort of sentient vehicles and sort of this green tinge to it, a little linking thing between them.
And yet somehow that green tinge in John Carpenter's film looks so much better and classier than the green we get in this.
It looks like, I won't say you, Mike, because you're actually very good technically, but the green tinge, the cosmic dust in Maximum Overdrive looks like something I would try and knock up on like Adobe Photoshop or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just bloody awful, isn't it?
I know. How do you find the way it ends then, this movie, when they do finally kind of escape the truck stop and they decide they've got to get to a boat, don't they, in order to get off to an island where there are no machines, essentially.
I mean, it's an okay ending. I mean, it does just sort of end. I mean, before that they blow up the Green Goblin truck, don't they, as well?
That's right.
That's another thing I find mad about this movie, is just that in this truck stop you've got basically an arsenal of weapons. You've got enough to take down a small army that just the guy who owns a truck stop is really into it or something. So it's just mad where suddenly halfway through the movie someone suddenly pulls out a bazooka.
I know, but it's just so much like firing machine guns and bazookas and explosions, isn't it? It's hilarious. Yeah.
It's weird. Yeah. It's weird how young kings seem to have such a thing about explosions. If you go through his work, you got the gas station in Carrie, you got in the book The Shining, Overlook obviously ends with the hotel going in flames. You got Firestarter with fire all through it.
Yeah.
You've got Trash Can Man in The Stand and the oil refinery sort of blowing it up with some of the best moments in The Stand. It's almost like there's something in him that he wanted to set the world on fire. And this film, again, it ends with a truck stop sort of going up in flames. And
Well,
It's mad.
You've got that amazing cliche that a lot of people kind of poke fun at in movies these days, that trope of somebody will just fire a gun at a car and the car will immediately explode.
Yeah,
For no reason whatsoever.
Yeah. It's mad. It's mad. Apparently, it was a really dangerous set, wasn't it?
I bet it fucking was.
I think partly, again, King not knowing what he was doing, but there was always explosions and people didn't always feel fully safe. And the cinematographer who actually, he did Silver Bullet as well, didn't he? Nazuro, he lost an eye on this set.
No way.
Yeah, that basically they were doing one of the lawnmower scenes and King wanted the camera to be closer and lower to the lawnmower, and they were saying, we got to take the blades off to make it safe. And King was like, no, fuck that, we've got to have the blades, blah, blah, blah. And apparently the turning blades sort of hit a chunk of wood or something and a wood chip flew out and pierced his eye.
Fuck.
Cinematographer's eye, and he had 2 or 3 operations, but then he lost his eye and sued Stephen King and the studio for 18 million.
I'm not surprised, to be honest. I mean, I think fair play, because especially seeing as you're a cinematographer by trade and then you can't see out of one eye, that sounds fair enough to me.
It's mad. Like, the film cost 9 million, I think, and only took 7 million at the box office.
Oh, wow.
That's what a disaster it was. But yeah, and then he sued them for twice the budget, which, like you said,
luckily,
fair play. I don't know how that actually panned out, how much he got or what.
I was going to say, luckily King, probably that's pocket change to King, isn't it? So
must be,
even at the time, I expect. So let's talk about that reaction then. You just mentioned there, it didn't make a whole lot of money. How did this film compare to Christine in terms of what audiences and critics thought about it?
Well, it totally flopped. Like, Christine opened at about 1,040 cinemas in America, and it took 21 million, which was kind of decent. It's not good, it's not bad, it did okay. And like I said, it got sort of middling reviews, lukewarm reviews. This movie, Maximum Overdrive, it took 7 million, it completely flopped. I mean, for a Stephen King, and also that marketing of Stephen King directing Stephen King.
Yeah.
King actually sold it on the fact that he said, if you want the job done properly, you've got to do it yourself. I'm going to adapt this myself. Other people have botched my work, I'm going to do it. So you'd think that it would be a golden egg, people would flock to see the King of Horror doing his first directorial effort, but it absolutely flopped, and it got awful reviews, just saying. I don't for a second think it's a worse film based on a King, but certainly now I think stuff like Lawnmower Man and a few others are a lot worse.
Yeah.
I have quite a bit of fun with this movie, but it is a pretty bad movie, and people jumped on it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And this did sort of usher in an era of not great King adaptations, right? I mean, like, we got a lot of the kind of the TV era of Stephen King coming up, the kind of the Tommy Knockers kind of era of Stephen King adaptations coming up.
Yeah, we did. There's been some bad ones over the years.
Yeah, there have.
I hated Dreamcatcher, which I've only seen once. I've never gone back to it.
Same, actually. Same.
Maybe I like it a bit more now, but I remember at the time being really disappointed.
We had the recent Firestarter, the recent Pet Sematary, just a lot of very generic, kind of quite bland adaptations.
Yeah, at least this has personality.
Yeah. Do you think you would have ever welcomed more King, directing efforts? Like, had he maybe come off the coke and booze, could he have done a better job, do you think?
I would have been interested. I would have liked to have seen him do one sober just to see. But I don't think... I mean, Stephen King as a writer is a genius.
Yeah.
He presents his stories in quite simple ways. And, you can see why he says, I'm the Big Mac and fries. That, he's not a great stylist with his writing, but that's so hard to do. There's such purity and clarity and colour. And his characters, I think he's just a genius writer, one of the great writers. As a director, at best, you can call him like a hack, based on this. So maybe I'd be interested to see one sober, but I certainly don't feel we're missing anything.
Yeah.
King himself, when Maximum Overdrive came out, just said it's the worst film ever based on my work, and I'm never directing again. Like, I'm never going near a camera.
Well, there you go. No, I love it. And I think you're right. I mean, writing and directing are two very different things. And we've seen just how masterful King's work can be when it is directed by someone who knows what they're doing, right? I mean, again, this double bill was the perfect example of that, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You did. Some of the worst films ever made are based on Stephen King, and some of the best films ever made are based on Stephen King, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get the whole gamut, don't you? I love it. Well, there we go. Well, Jamie, thank you. That was what a fun double bill of movies to discuss. I loved that.
It's awesome.
What's your favourite? I mean, it might be Christine by the sounds of it, Jamie, but what's your favourite movie in this kind of subgenre, this category of kind of mad science or man-made monsters?
Well, my favourite, just totally with my heart and everything, is Christine, without a doubt. In terms of the best, with my critical hat on, the one film in this genre which I put in my Sight and Sound top 10 list is 2001.
Oh, yeah.
A Space Odyssey, which is obviously a complete copper bottom masterpiece. But there's so many great ones, Mike. I adore The Terminator, James Whale's Frankenstein, Blade Runner, The Fly, RoboCop.
Yeah.
I think Cronenberg's Crash is my favourite Cronenberg movie, and I think it's one of the 2 or 3 best films of the 1990s. I rate it that highly.
Do you know what? That is such an interesting kind of spin on the dangers of cars, right? I mean, we talked about horror movies, whether we call Crash a horror movie, but it certainly is horrific in the way it portrays car crashes, right? And the dangers of cars in a really interesting, unique, kinky way. But I love that film too.
Yeah, it would make an interesting double bill with Christine, wouldn't it?
It would. I'm going to be covering it alongside Titan on this series of the podcast, which again I think is going to make for an interesting double bill. Yeah,
definitely. No, so like we said at the top of this show, there's so many great ones. I wanted to give a shout out to 7 or 8 there. I could name many more, but they're my favourites.
Yeah, and you're right, you can't beat Hal from 2001, can you, in terms of the scary, sinister robot?
Yeah, it's the ultimate.
Yeah. I love it. Well, there you go. Well, Jamie, thank you so much. This has been, as always, such an absolute pleasure. And just remind people where they can come and find you and more of your work out there online.
So I write for Empire Magazine, Sunday Times Culture and Saturday Review, Screen International, BBC Culture, SFX Magazine. It's a fair few. Pop up on various podcasts and stuff. I'm on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. I'm on Blue Sky, Instagram. So if you just go searching for Jamie Graham, I can bother you from some angle or other. So yeah, please do.
Amazing. Jamie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike. I loved it, as always.
And that's it for this week. Thank you all so much for listening. And one more time, a massive thank you to the brilliant Jamie Graham. Oh, what a fun and slightly deranged double bill that was. I loved it. Let us know what you thought of this week's films, Christine and Maximum Overdrive. Does anyone want to stick up for Maximum Overdrive? Does anyone out there think it's a genuinely good film, or is it just a guilty pleasure? Let me know. You can email me, evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can also find the Evolution of Horror on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find me, Mike Muncer, on Instagram and Blue Sky. If you want to discuss this week's episode with fellow listeners, you can join the Evolution of Horror discussion group on Facebook or the Evolution of Horror Discord. If you want weekly bonus episodes and get ad-free versions of these main episodes, sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. This podcast is part of the EOH network. You can also listen to 2 other weekly EOH podcasts right now, Hammer Time with Becky Dark and Kevin Lyons, and Carry On Up the podcast with me and Susan Kalman. So on to next week then, and I'm so excited about next week. We've got another really fun double bill. I am going to be joined by my Dream Warriors Stevie Webb and Becky Dark, and we are going to be discussing 2 Frank Henenlotter classics, Basket Case from 1982 and Frankenhooker from 1990. Holy shit. Join us next week for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.